Welcome to Fly on the Wall podcast. I'm your host, Chris Sonksen, CEO and founder of Church Boom. Here you get to sit in on a live coaching session as I coach pastors through the ministry challenges we all face. If you find this podcast helpful, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Hey, welcome to today's podcast. I am so excited. We're talking with my good friend Jason, an incredible leader, has an amazing church, and we're talking about how do you keep momentum going in a church? What can you do? What are the practical things you can do? What steps can you take? What things do you need to communicate to your leaders and volunteers? How do you keep momentum going in a church? It is a great conversation. Let's dive into it. Let's jump into it, man. How can I help you today? What's on your mind?
So, bunch of questions, but we've been a portable church for 12 years.
Yep.
And just celebrated 12 years this past weekend. So, just real excited. We are getting ready to head into a permanent facility, our first one in 12 years. So,
wow.
So I have questions surrounding some of those things. I think my first questions, what are some things to be aware of from going from a portable setting to a permanent setting? Just some things that would help us navigate that transition in this next season.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Going from portable to permanent, in theory, it is it's awesome because you have your own permanent home. I've been through that. I've walked a lot of guys through that, and there is a couple characteristics that always seem to show up that I think you need to be aware of. When you go from a temporary home to a permanent home, from breaking down, setting up and all that to more of a permanent house, the benefits are amazing. I mean, you don't have to break down anymore and set up, all that stuff, set up, tear down anymore, trailers hauling around and all that stuff. Right. You don't have to do all that stuff. And that's awesome. You got a place you can call your own and 24/7 and it's all great. Here's where I think some of the challenge can come in at times is there seems to be a decrease of urgency because you almost feel like you've arrived to the promised land. It's almost like you're on a 30-hour drive with your family to go to some great vacation, and when you get there, all you want to do is relax because you're there. And that's almost like it is here. The urgency is lost. I see that. I've seen that with my own life. I've seen that with ministries, other pastors I've worked with. They're like, man, it just seemed like all of a sudden the energy was lost. And so I think you lose, or you have the chance of losing urgency, the chance of losing energy, the chance of losing mission and focus. Because again, if you think of it like the promised land, you've arrived. So what are you working towards now? And you also lost a ton of, not lost, but you also misplaced possibly a ton of volunteers that were used to doing something and aren't doing it anymore. And one of the things I think I would encourage you to do, Jason, is to think about, okay, there's this sort of, yay, we're here, and we've arrived at this location, and there comes a lot of benefits with that. But what is the vision beyond this building? Yeah, great that we're here, but the reality is a new building's only new for a couple months, honestly, and then after a while, it's just a building.
It's a whole place.
Yeah, it's just like, all right, we're here. I mean, it doesn't take long for it to feel that way. So I think people always view the grand opening of their building as hey, it's March 1st is the day or whatever. Okay, that's the grand opening of the building. But I always say, okay, but let's talk about after. What are you going to do after? Where's the vision going? What are the people putting their mind to, their focus to, their energy to? What excites them? We rejoice on this, but man, now, guess what we're going to do now? We're going to think about that. Like, we're always putting vision in front of people. Without a vision, the people perish. That word perish actually translated means to wander around aimlessly. So think about that. without a vision, okay, we arrived at this building, but if we don't have a vision, then we wander around aimlessly. I guess we're just here at the building. So think about the energy loss, think about the intensity loss, think about the focus loss, and say, okay, great that we have a grand opening. Let's celebrate. Yes, we can take a breather and we can celebrate, and we take a month or two and celebrate and enjoy the building.
Right.
But second, third, fourth month, we're thinking, okay, guys, let's look at what God has for us now, whatever that may be. We're not talking about another building, but we got to make sure that vision stays in front of the people.
Okay. Awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So I have I don't know if this question's a little bit more particular, is with that thought in mind, is there things from a timeline standpoint that you would put in place that I, as the lead guy, should be executing between now and moving into the facility? So the facility is probably end of September, beginning of October of completion. Is there anything on my end that I need to be doing? Obviously crafting vision, but some other things that from a timeline standpoint?
Yeah, there is. There's a couple things. Buildings do have a way of creating energy and excitement. There's no doubt. It's not forever, but it does bring it for a while. It gets your people excited, which is awesome. And I think you get if you're done right, you get a lot of guests. So when you're looking at a building, there's a couple things that I think that are really important. First, we focus a lot on getting up to the building, and then we lose focus on the first 3 months in the building, 4 months, 5 months. It's almost like I live in Southern California. I do very little surfing. I don't even know if I'd call it surfing, but I lay on the board and I wait for someone to bring me something to drink. But it's a bummer when you're out there surfing and you're like waiting for this wave, and then something comes up and you're like, no, forget it. I'll wait for the next one. And then you're like, oh, I missed the wave. It's just like you missed that wave. I think pastors miss a wave at times. So here's what I'm saying. A couple of thoughts that I would have, what I would encourage you to think about is, okay, you're going up to, let's call it September 1st for your grand opening. We'll just call it September 1st. You go up to that September 1st, and that's great. There's a lot of work that goes up to it. But that first 3 to 6 months, you have a wave. It's a new building. There's new excitement. New people are going to visit. What are we going to do to make sure we get the best out of that wave? So, okay, we have the grand opening, but let's talk about the next week. Or can there be something every 2 weeks after? Like, okay, we had our grand opening, and then in 2 weeks, we have the biggest children's thing we've ever done. We're going to do this really cool thing with children. And then 2 weeks after that, we've got this special guest coming that played, the running back for whatever, some team, and then 2 weeks. So it's not like we don't have to dump a lot of money in it. You especially don't have to do that with children. But if you could think about 3 to 6 months. What if we did 3 to 5 really cool things that just were things that we just have never done before? Maybe 2 guests that unchurched people actually care about meeting, like a coach or someone that was on America's Got Talent or came in 5th place or whatever, like something cool. And then, man, what if we did a couple things in there for the kids? Like we did this big reptile Sunday and brought in this guy that owned all these reptiles, and the kids got to pet them. Like there was like a way that we could not only advertise the grand opening, but on the grand opening, keep pushing for the next few weeks or next few months. Like things that would just continue to create buzz and create 2 things. 1, a reason for new people to come back, and 2, a reason for you people to invite people.
That's good.
Giving your people a reason to invite people. Okay, that's one thing. Secondly is don't forget to set in place and I don't know what you do at the church. I have no idea, but you might have a growth track, or you might have, meet the pastor, pizza with the pastor, coffee with the pastor, something where people sort of meet you and maybe kind of decide if this is their church home. Maybe it's not a full-blown membership, but during those first few months, I would have a few of those.
Okay.
Hey, maybe say you open up on September 1st. September 8th is the second Sunday. By September 15th, you're having coffee with the pastor after service. Hey, it's 1 hour long. Get to know the pastor, get to know him, get to know a little bit about the church. Maybe you can figure out how you can get plugged into the church. Like, there's got to be a few things. I think those things should be regular. I believe in those systems very much and should be a regular part of your church world all 12 months. But you want to maybe pile them up a little bit more, maybe one or two extra ones in those first 3 or 4 months, because you want to see new people coming in, but you want to engage them as quick as possible. It's all about the speed of engagement, Jason. It's all about the speed of engagement. So create a little pizza with the pastor, coffee with the pastor, where you tell them a little bit about the church and just say, and by the way, man, if you want to get involved in our church, here's a few ways you can do that. Just something simple, something easy, something, don't be complex. Don't make it 6 months long, 4 classes, 3 hours each. None of that. Just something simple to be like, I like you as a pastor. I like this church. And man, I think I want to get involved a little bit. Maybe I could be a greeter once a month or an usher once a month. You want to get as many people not only showing up, but as many people engaged into the life of the church as fast as you can during those first 4 or 5 months. You don't want to miss that wave, because the wave will end. And then that brings you to that first question of, when the wave starts ending, the new vision starts coming in.
Right. Okay.
So,
awesome.
and so I always say this, that we always think about the grand opening and we don't think about day one after the grand opening.
Yeah, that's good.
After the grand opening is just as important.
Right.
If not even more, because that's when you're going to start collecting the harvest.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. Yep. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
So to kind of, we've always ran one service, and just because of the space, we've been able to do that. We can move our walls and those sorts of things. But going into this facility, we know we're going to have to go to 2 services based on our parking and those sorts of things right away. Okay. So here's the question is, what are some ways that I can and our team can change the culture from serving once a month to more engagement in serving? Because right now we have enough serve team folks to be able to carry one service a month for them to serve once a month. So how do we shift that culture and that mentality with going from one service to 2 services?
Yeah. Well, a couple things that I think are important when making the jump from 1 to 2 services. I think it's really important first that the leaders that are heading over the worship, over the children, over all guest services, ushers, greeters, all that, they need to have, and this is going to sound like a dumb moment, but sometimes I think we miss it. It's not just, I might need a couple more. Okay, so you talk to guest services. I might need some more ushers and greeters. Okay, how many? Exactly how many do you need? Have you thought that through? Have you thought exactly how many more worship team members you need? Exactly how many more children's workers you need? Not just more, exactly how many more. They need to think, your team, if it was me, I would bring together the people that are responsible for these teams and say, okay, guys, we need to get really specific, because they're going to need to restructure. Anytime you add weight, you have to restructure. You ever thought about that for a moment? You can't just go over to a building that's 10 stories tall and say, we're going to just add 10 more stories. No, you're not.
Right.
You added more weight means you got to change the structure. When you add more services and more people, you got to change the structure, because otherwise you have a structure that can't handle the weight.
Good.
And so you've got to look and say, okay, children's workers, I'm going to get more volunteers. How many? I mean, literally put it on a piece of paper and say, okay, I'm the leader. I've got 5 classroom coordinators and I got 15 volunteers. I'm just making this up. Okay, but what's it going to look like with 2 services? Are you going to you're going to have to double this thing. You're going to have to raise up more leaders and volunteers. So the answer, I think part of it is they got to learn to sit and serve. So they sit in one, serve in the other. That's a culture thing. But the greater problem usually comes in, I've seen, is when you add services, people aren't thinking about, they don't have specific numbers. They're not thinking about, no, I need 4 more leaders and 12 more volunteers. They got to know the exact number, not just some arbitrary, I don't know, 5 more people. Like, well, tell me exactly what you need. Because if they don't know exactly what they need, they're not going to get it.
Okay.
And
Go ahead.
I was going to say, and when they don't get it, they'll blame you. Here's how they'll blame you. We went to a second service. I'm burned out. We grew too fast, and now we got all these people at the second service. And pastor, and you pushed just to launch a second service. It'll somehow be your fault. And you want to avoid that, man. You want to make sure that you're sitting with a worship person and a children's person and whoever, and say, how many? Let's get a piece of paper out. Let's draw out your current structure. Okay, your little flow chart. And then now let's look at a flow chart with 2 services. What is it going to look like? And help them get there. And then they know, this is what I need. Between now and September, here's what I need.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes tons of sense. So with that thought in mind, the current mentality of our current people that are serving is that one service. So how do I shift? What are the things I can do to increase their serving, obviously adding new people, but increasing their serving from that mentality of we only do 1, we may need to do 2, we may need to sit 1, serve 1 type thing.
Yep. Well, what you're changing there is this is the back half of that question, I think, is that you have to change the paradigm shift in their thinking, and you also have to change the culture. And culture is always changed by the 3 same things all the time. Stories you tell, heroes you make, and the things you celebrate. Stories you tell, heroes you make, things you celebrate. So if we are going to start moving towards that, I think that you've got to start moving towards, sit and serve and them getting used to 2 services, all that stuff. You got to bring those volunteers together strategically over the next several months. You got to bring them together on a regular basis. And you've got to start bringing them together, casting the vision, sit and serve, get the language there. Hey, we sit and we serve. We sit and we serve. We're others-minded, and we sit and we serve. You got to get remember, Jason, language shapes behavior, and behavior shapes culture. So the language is sit and serve. So that gets into the water. So let's say you had a volunteer meeting tonight, and you're meeting with all volunteers. You're like, hey, guys, we got to get used to sit and serve, blah, 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 blah. We've got to get used to that we're others focused. By the second time you meet or the third time you meet, you're going to find 3 or 4 or 5 people that are already embracing it. Like, hey, pastor, I'm all in for sit and serve. I'm all in to do whatever it takes. Now you're up there. Now let's fast forward 4 weeks from now. Hey guys, I told you last time we were together, sit and serve. I told you that, that we need to be others minded focused. And I just want to give a big shout out to Joanne, Jennifer, Tommy, Bobby, and Jessica. Man, you 5, you've approached me, you've emailed me, you've texted me and just said, Pastor, we're all in. Thank you for doing that. What are we doing? Stories you tell, heroes you make, things you celebrate. You're making a hero out of those 5 people, because everybody else will start following that culture So what you're doing is, always remember, Jason, there's early, mid, and late adopters. Early, mid, and late adopters. You make that announcement at your volunteer. Hey, we got to sit and serve. We got to be other people's minded, and man, blah, blah, blah. You're going to have 4, 5, 6 people going, I'm all in. Those are your early adopters. Now what you're doing is, over the next couple meetings, is you're taking your mid adopters, you're exposing your early adopters, celebrating them, stories you tell, heroes you make. You're making them heroes, pointing them out. And what's going to happen is you're going to find your mid adopters will start moving over to the early adopters because you're celebrating the early adopters. So you make Joanne and Bobby and Jessica and whoever else, yay, and make a hero out of them. Then you're going to find the rest of them you're going to start, a large portion will start going towards that. Then at your next meeting, you're going to point out 5 different people. And then you're going to find even more of those. So your lates will become mid and your mids will become early. And that's what you're ultimately moving towards. Awesome. But you do it through celebrate. You always reward what you want repeated. You always celebrate. You always tell stories about the things you want repeated. Always tell stories about the things you want repeated, and then people will start following it. That's culture. That's how culture gets created every time.
Okay, that's awesome.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes tons of sense. Yes, sir.
That's it. You can't just make the announcement. You got to be strategic. Like, okay, I got to meet a certain amount of times. I got to find the early adopters. I got to make a hero out of the early adopters. Then the mid adopters will start doing that. I got to make more heroes out of the people, and they'll just start coming on. Culture gets shifted always by who you make the hero and the story that you're going to celebrate.
That's good.
That's always awesome. It's always how you do it. So, does that help?
Yes, tons. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else you got for today, man?
I got one more. We got time.
Yeah, fire away.
Okay. All right. So going from 300 to 500, new staff hires. So currently right now we have myself, we have a full-time like executive administrator. We have a part-time kids, part-time worship, part-time like relational care / groups, helps with groups. So that's kind of our staff. But going from 300 to 500, and I know what got us here won't necessarily take us there. And we know there's structural changes coming, but also like, what are some next hires moving from 300 to 500?
Yeah. From the list that you just gave me, so I'm only going on what you just told me. If I was, and you might already have someone over this, so maybe the question may or may not be a hire, but more, let's call it attention, because you might already have someone doing it, but they're good, but they're not great, or they give the time they can, they do the best they can in these areas. But so I think let's pull back a little bit and say, okay, instead of the hire, where does the focus need to be? And because I might say, hey, you need to focus on this, or you need to think about this hire, and you're like, I already got someone for that. Okay, but are they operating at this level? Because this is what becomes important. The next level for me, in my opinion, is a couple things. One is the assimilation and all things next step. Who is that person that is monitoring how many people are starting to come here, new guests we have, and getting them involved and engaged in the life of the church, and they're monitoring that time frame. The average person takes 4 to 6 months to get engaged in the life of the church. Who's overseeing the process to say, okay, Pastor Jason, this past month we got 21 new people involved in ministry. They've all been at the church less than 4 months. Next month, we have 19 people involved in ministry. Here's how they got involved in ministry. These are the areas where they got involved. This is the path we took them on. The engagement is by far where I would start looking.
Okay.
That's one thing. And then the other area, I would look at engagement for sure. Like that would be like really a big deal. And engagement could be they're engaged by their volunteering or they're getting into groups. But someone is saying, this is how, look, all these new people are coming in. They went and met with the pastor for pizza and they hung out with him. This is how many people got engaged. Someone needs to know those numbers, and someone needs to have the one job that says, I get people involved in the life of the church at a very high rate. You do that and you'll grow. People used to want to believe before they belong. Now they want to belong before they believe. And so the more they belong to the church, the more they're all in. And I would focus on that. You'll jump from 3 to 5, not only because of a building, but by the speed of engagement.
Okay. Awesome.
That's where I would focus a lot of it. So,
all right,
man, dude.
Good.
Yeah. Hey, it's great
man.
talking with you, man. Hey, thanks for being on today, man. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to the Fly on the Wall podcast. We hope today's episode provided you with some practical steps to lead your church to the next level. If you found this episode helpful, take a moment to leave us a review and share it with others. Remember, when the pastor grows, the church grows, and we grow pastors. We love you. We're your raving fans, and we are cheering you on. See you next week.